So when I asked him to help me and he took me through the steps in the book in a very methodical way, not only did I find a person that I had a relationship unlike any that I had ever had, I also recognized that there was a path that if I would continue to follow every day for the rest of my life, that I would never have to drink again and that I would have a new way of handling life.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you are all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Ooh la la! Hold on. Before I go into that, I do not believe I have ever used the phrase or word, I guess, ooh la la in my entire life, but the phrase came to my little pea brain as I was approaching this mic here, and so you get to savor that word along with me. Ooh la la. You know, stepping up to the mic does strange things to individuals. Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to speak for everybody, right? I don't want to generalize like that and say the mic affects everyone in a strange way. But for me, stepping up to the mic here and chatting, talking, putting my words out there in the universe, whatever you want to call that, does some very strange things to me. But nonetheless, ooh la la, let's go back and start over again. That was the voice of my of my friend David G, which I know so many of you are going to be excited about, that you heard at the beginning of this here episode number 261, episode number 261 of Sober Speak, and you will be hearing so much more from Davido. Is it David or Davido? I can't remember. I'm trying to pronounce David in Spanish, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I think I'm close. Nonetheless, that was his voice that you heard at the beginning of this episode, and you will be hearing so much more from him in just a moment. But first things first, because we want to put the first things first. You don't want to put the first things second. You want to put the first things first. This episode is brought to you by Rachel and Gazem and David and Kate, Marie and Michelle. Guess what Rachel and Gazem and David and Kate and Marie and Michelle did? Well, they went to that little thing we have called a website, www.soberspeak.com, not clom. They clicked on the little yellow donate tab and they made a contribution. So thank you so much, Rachel and Gazem and David and Kate and Marie and Michelle. This here episode is coming right out to youans. John M., yes, just another bozo on the bus, will indeed be the chairperson for this meeting between meetings, and I am truly honored and privileged to serve all of you listening in. So take a seat, if you will, around this virtual table, and let's get cranked up. So I've had a few people write me lately and ask, how can I access the podcast? And I know how to access podcasts, but not everybody does. So let me just kind of give you a few places where you can access it. You can access it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, which is formerly known as iTunes, Google Podcast. By the way, if you're listening to this right now, and I'm happy, it just occurred to me. I've had people writing in saying they've heard the podcast and then they asked me how to access it. But if you're listening to this, you would actually be accessing it. But okay, let's just let that one go and list out the other places where you can access Sober Speak. A meeting between meeting at your fingertips. Ooh, just wanted to throw that in there. Anyway, you can also access it on Podbean, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. In fact, if you have one of them little devices in your house and you want to say, "Hey, Alexa," by the way, I had done this before. I have one of those here in Studio AA, and I had to disconnect it because every time I would give this example, it would start talking to me. But anyway, you can say, "Hey, Alexa," what do you say? Play Sober Speak podcast, and it should come up if that is your jam. If you like doing that, if that is the way you like to listen to podcasts, feel more than free to do such. All right. Now, on to our featured guest of the week. David G is going to be sharing with us. And the subject of this particular here, for the most part, the subject of this here episode is sponsorship. As we have done many times with David G. For those of you who have not heard him before, he's been on the podcast many, many times, but we have done this in the past with David. We sit down beforehand and it's real informal and very quick. You go, "What do you want to talk about today? How about this?" And we kind of come up with a subject and we'll start going down one road. And then I either think of something else I want to talk about and I ask him a question, or he thinks of something else that he wants to talk about. And it just kind of goes off on that tangent. And so this is another time where we started down one path and we ended up meandering over to some other topics. I just like saying that word, meandering. I don't know why, but so anyway, we meander over some other topics, and we end up talking about, for the most part, we talk about sponsorship, what to look for in a sponsor, David's roots in sponsorship, how he learned the basics, and how he continues to sponsor today. Oh, you know what's very interesting here? This is like a twist of fate in some form or fashion, because I should turn all this stuff off, but I'm not. But at this very moment, my sponsor, Bob, is actually calling me on the phone. Now, I'm not going to take the call, but I can see it coming in. And he's calling me because I called him just a little bit ago. I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour or something like that, because there's some things I needed to talk to him about. And he's calling me, and as I am talking about sponsorship, so strange. What do you call that? Serendipitous? Is that the word? Or something like, all the planets align just as they should, or something like that. But nonetheless, I'll call Bob back after I get through recording this here episode. But anyway, we talk about sponsorship with David. We get down to, I guess, what I would call brass tacks. In other words, David is fairly detailed about how he takes people through the steps. If you're new to the podcast or to AA or to any of the steps programs, and you have heard people say, okay, so-and-so is taking me through the steps. And you think to yourself, what does that mean? Well, David kind of talks about that in detail. And David is also someone who uses the 12 and 12 when walking people through the steps, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And this gives you an idea of basically, like I said, one way of taking people through the steps. David also talks about his stepbrother, Jeff. and how his brother was lost to this insidious illness. And David talks once again about something that is down here. I'm sure they have it in other parts of the country, but it's known as the 5 Alive. In other words, it's a few simple rules which David learned from his sponsor Clovis in order to stay sober. All right, everybody, enjoy David G. And guess what? We will have plenty listener feedback at the end of David's episode. Enjoy. Okay, everybody. So we are once again here, face to face, eyeball to eyeball, with the one and only Mr. David G. So David G, go ahead, introduce yourself, please. Give your sobriety date if you wish, and tell people where you live.
All right. This is David G. I'm an alcoholic, drug addict, a general freak of nature at times in my life. I live in Frisco, Texas, and I've been sober since September 15th of 1993.
Yeah, you live
Blocks away.
Blocks away.
If you wonder why I'm on here so much, it's convenience.
Well, and you do a good job, and I get a lot of people asking you to come back on the pod. But speaking of how long you've been on, the last time we actually released an episode for you was in August of 2021. Now, that doesn't include, I did release an episode for you called Oklahoma Citywide, which was a live recording, but it's been quite a while.
Yeah, I didn't think it'd been that long.
Right. It's been, I can't even believe it. As you know, we've tried. See, here's the thing. I usually just get people like on the schedule, right? Which is what we ended up doing this time. But there are times where I go, I see you in meetings all the time, right, as you know. And I think I'll just grab David this week and we'll just go over and do it. And then I get backed up, and then, you go out of town or whatever, and our schedules just don't match up. And so
I swear I'm not that busy. It just seems like it.
And vice versa. The last time, in fact, I don't, if you want to talk about this, you can. If not, I bleep it out or whatever, but we were scheduled to record. It was when you were out of town, which is so weird. You went to the lake.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And you were set up. You had taken a mic with you, I believe, and we were going to record you remotely. And you want to talk about what happened and why you couldn't record?
Well, it was totally just emotional, not sleeping the night before. I had had a bunch of stuff happen, and I was up all night. And when it got close to time to meet with you, I just said, you know what, John Michael, I don't think we need to broadcast crazy today. So I'll do it if you want, but you may not like what you get because I'm feeling a little nuts.
And there's something else I want to talk to you about real quick before we get started on, where we're going here today, where we kind of left off last time. And that is, I was in a meeting with you. Oh, it was a week ago. In fact, it was on Saturday at that meeting that we go to called Frisco Fourth Dimension on Saturday here in the Frisco area. And during that meeting, there were people that were cross-talking, for lack of a better word, and they were talking about you, and
awkward.
And they were saying something to the effect of, with that David, when I first heard him, I really didn't like him. I just thought he was just, kind of obnoxious or whatever. But now, like, I love what he has to say. And I don't know if you remember, I told you this. Yep. I had a similar experience.
Yep.
Because you're very intense about what you share. And the method in which you share. And I remember saying to you that as soon as I realized, and this just took like 3 weeks with me, whatever it was, but as soon as I realized it was not personal toward me, he wasn't coming at me, because sometimes that's what it feels like. I realized, this guy's got a lot of good stuff to say. So do you get that very often?
Yes. I would be the person in the room that between 1987 and 1993, if I thought about a person like me, it would only be negative and hostile. And if I spoke about a person that acted like me, I would say untoward things about them. On September 15th, 1993, the day I got sober, After I recognized that I had not truly worked the 12 steps the way people talked about working 12 steps from the book, a few minutes later, as I was showering, one of those good 15, 20-minute showers that you just wish you could wash all of the grime out of your whole system, I realized that I needed to ask someone to help me work the steps that was the opposite of the people that I had always asked. Mm-hmm. A person similar to the way I am now, a person who seemed to have some grasp of what they needed in their life to get better. A person who at the time I thought sounded like a know-it-all. I used to call them big book thumpers and AA Nazis and wannabe gurus. You've heard me say that many times. And it was basically people who talked with a confidence about what they did with their program, because I thought they were just grandstanding, try to impress people to, be like the coolest person in AA. I did not understand that they were there for the same desperate reasons that I was there. I thought they were there to be like the student body president. Mm. And it's very relatable to me when people say stuff like that to me, because I have felt that way many times through my life. I'm not trying to label myself as a successful person, but what we're talking about is long-term sobriety in AA. And I've had long-term sobriety in AA. And so in that sense, there is success in my life. And I always found a way to devalue successful people around me. I did it in school with the people who got better grades than me. I did it in sports with people who were better than me. I always found something about them that they got the breaks and I didn't, and it wasn't fair. And that's so when someone says something like that to me, I'm really in a way happy for them, in the sense that now they can hear that I'm not talking about them. I'm just talking about me, and they can relate to me. I do not believe in crosstalk. You will never hear me in a meeting even congratulate someone for their milestone. I do not, and I know people do that all the time. I think you did it in the meeting today, and I'm not being judgy. I'm just saying I don't believe that it's appropriate to make another person the center of attention during my share. I think that's crosstalk. And I wish the person hadn't called me. I think he said that he was like hearing the Holy Spirit, and that's a sweet sentiment, a little over the top.
Yeah.
But the point is that I wish that he would have kept that to himself, just because it made me the center of attention while he was speaking. And that makes me feel awkward and uncomfortable. And I don't want to do that to other people.
Yes. Okay. So I just kind of changed through talking to you.
Yep.
Or through listening to you, I should say. I just kind of changed. We may get back to what we were going to take we were going to take the middle of the 12 step, because that's the last one we did. The last one that we did, well, there was a couple things that happened. On episode number 171, it was called Having Had a Spiritual Awakening. And it was basically the beginning of the 12 step, and we went all through that. And then when we got to episode 198, the idea was to take the middle of the 12 step as a result of these steps. And we may end up talking about that. I don't know. We'll just see where the spirit takes us here, so to speak. But one thing I want to make sure that we end up talking about with you, because you have more experience in this arena than anybody that I personally, you're at least top three. And what I mean by that is sponsorship. Mm-hmm. You sponsor a ton of guys. You always have. It's a strong suit. It's something you're gifted at. And a lot of guys you are one of those people also that when people come into a meeting, they're usually looking for a leader, right? Somebody who does know what they're talking about, and you attract those individuals, which is great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about sponsorship and how you do it. What's the evolution been like of that for you as you're moving through your sobriety, and kind of just some general thoughts you have about sponsorship?
Okay. Well, the first thought that goes through my head goes back to my childhood. And I think one of the things that led to my alcoholism, and is a big component of my alcoholism, is I didn't feel a real anchorage to anything. the things that I was taught about religion and family and school and sports and society and politics just all struck me as BS. I thought that my parents were hypocritical. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. That we would, they'd have their friends over on Saturday night and get high and drink. And then the next morning we'd go to church and they would act all pious and be Brother Phil. And my mom was a minister. And all of those things left me feeling like the foundation under my feet was shaky, like it wasn't real. And I carried that for a long time in my life. And when I met with my sponsor, Clovis.
So real quick.
Yeah.
And I know you're very close to your sister.
Yeah.
Did she have the same basic
Yes.
viewpoint of that?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've talked about it a lot.
Okay.
It's something that we've really talked about through the years that, we were taken care of as children. We had all of our needs met in terms of we were educated very well. There was busing when I was a kid and my parents really sacrificed so that we could go to private schools and not get bussed out of our neighborhood into a rough neighborhood. We never went without food or clothing or shelter or any of the basic necessities. But when it came to being important to our parents, I think both of us really lacked in that department. They were a little bit hedonists, they're both deceased now. So I don't even think they would mind me telling this when they were alive. But they were partiers, they wanted to be the cool people. My dad was a dentist, but we had a greenhouse in our backyard where he grew marijuana, and my mom was a minister, but she liked to party. And so there was a lot of duality to my parents, and the way that came across to both me and my sister, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think that she would agree, is that we were not the most important people in our parents' lives. And I know I, for one, longed for something that I could hold on to, that I was important to someone, that I was a priority to them, that I mattered to them more than their own kind of selfish things. And so when I came into AA and I met with Clovis, I had never had a relationship with anyone, not my parents, not girlfriends, not personal friends, no one that was completely based on honesty and acceptance of who I was as a person. And that all came out of step work. When Clovis met with me, he would give me an assignment, and the assignments in the steps are deep. When you read the doctor's opinion and it tells you, hey, you have an allergy, you have an abnormal reaction to alcohol and drugs and a lot of things in life. What does your abnormal reaction look like? What do you do that normal people don't do when they drink? When the average temperate drinker goes to a party, what's the difference between when David goes to a party? And the difference is staggering. The way I behaved in my personal life as a result of drugs, sex, acting out in all different sorts of ways is staggering to normal people. I think it's why when I came to AA, even though I wasn't working the steps, I felt very at home because I was around a whole bunch of people whose drinking and drugging was staggering. Right? Just extreme. The line in the book that many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death and then end up in AA. Well, that's what happened with me. But I still didn't have an anchorage. When I was at meetings from 87 to 93, I was still that same guy. I was the guy who didn't have anything that I really knew how to believe in. I didn't even know what that would feel like because I had never done it before. I had never had an active faith because I always just basically did what I felt like doing. If a sponsor told me to do something and I didn't feel like doing it, I just wouldn't do it. And then I act like I had. And he wouldn't call me out on it so much. He'd just kind of sit around and wait for me to relapse, and I'd disappear and I'd come back and get a different sponsor. And that happened over and over. But when I met with Clovis, I think not only did I ask the right person to help me, which I don't think is a coincidence, because I think internally I had all of that old way of doing AA that I could stand, And I wasn't in a position where I felt like I could keep going on the way I was going in life, period. And so when I asked Clovis to sponsor me, I asked one of those people who was like I am, which was when he spoke about the steps, he spoke with an authority about what not an authority like he was smarter than everyone, but that he actually had something real, something that he continuously did, that he could hold on to and believe in. He had a way of waking up in the morning and what he did and how he faced his day and how he treated other people and how he trusted that God would take care of him, which always struck me as BS. But he did it year after year after year, and I kept relapsing year after year after year. So when I asked him to help me and he took me through the steps in the book in a very methodical way, not only did I find a person that I had a relationship unlike any that I had ever had, I also recognized that there was a path that if I would continue to follow every day for the rest of my life, that I would never have to drink again and that I would have a new way of handling life. And so let's flip it around. I sponsor a lot of people. I'm not saying a lot of the people that I sponsor stay sober, but I do have a lot of people that I've sponsored sober today. Plenty of people have asked me to sponsor them and not followed through. But I'll tell you, this is interesting. Not many people ask me to sponsor them that kind of want to BS around. Typically, they come to me and they're desperate and they're ready to do anything. The problem is so many of them, once the thing that made them desperate gets better, like their wife takes them back or their job takes them back or they get back the keys to their parents' house or whatever it is that got them to come, they taper off on calling me, taper off on doing things. So it's not a matter of the instructions that I'm giving to people, because they're the exact same instructions. I have probably 15 spirals of times I've been through the steps, and every one of them follows the same instructions.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that look for, well, not only, I get a lot of people that write me, and they want people to sponsor them, and they'll say it's one of the most, I guess, common questions that I get. Right? People they say, "How do you pick a sponsor? What's a good sponsor? What should Hey, like somebody asked me to sponsor them. What should I do?" So, if you think about, if somebody comes up to you and they say, "What should I look for in a sponsor?" What's your first thought on that?
My first thought goes back to what my problem was for a long time. And it was a convenient problem. And that is, I would ask people to sponsor me that I thought were cool. Easygoing, easy to be around, funny. Because I didn't know what to look for, And the difference between September 14th, 1993 and September 15th, 1993 is I had a recognition that I needed to ask someone to help me that had something that I didn't understand. My understanding was killing me. And so I asked, it's exactly what you talked about in the beginning. This person who comes in and says, when I first heard David G, he seemed like a loudmouth, know-it-all, obnoxious, blah, blah, blah. And I relate to that. When that guy said that at the meeting, I said, yeah, I get that a lot. I get it. I had that opinion of a lot of people, including Clovis, who helped save my life. Right? So what I would say to your question is simple. If you have asked people to sponsor you for years and it has not been effective, ask someone to sponsor you who you really don't necessarily like that much, but has a message that has been consistent and their life appears to have gotten better and better. Gotcha. My picker was broke, not just in romance. My picker was broke in the sponsorship arena.
Okay, so when you think about them, like somebody who asks you to sponsor, and they want you to take them through the steps, and like you said, if you've been around for any length of time, you know that some of them are just going to flame out. Some of them keep going. Some of them you create lifelong friendships with. There's a little bit of everything in there, right? But what is the basics? Like when you start taking somebody through the steps, and I say, okay, David, what do I need to do? What does it look like? And let me preface it by saying this. I know that there are a lot of people, and I think you're one of them, right? You'll go through every line in the big book with them, reading it through, and I'm just not one of those guys. I don't know if I don't have
I don't
patience.
do that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I don't do that.
Okay. So what do you do with people then to kind of take them
So
through
if you
the
asked
steps?
me to sponsor you you, the first thing I would ask you is if you had a big book. And if you said yes, I would ask you if you've highlighted in the big book. And if you said yes, I said, what colors have you used? And if you said yellow and orange, I would say, okay, go to get green highlighter. And I want you to start at the preface, and I want you to highlight anything that sounds like the solution, the problem of alcoholism, and anything that sounds like the solution to the problem of alcoholism. And the reason for that is the big book's written like that. It says problem, solution, problem, solution. It tells us what's wrong with us, what we have to do. That's kind of how the book is written.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I had no...
And I don't ask him to use different color highlighters, although some people do, and I'm cool with that. If they want to use like an orange one for the problem and a green one for the solution, that's totally fine. It's great. And I give them an example. You know, it talks about the allergy, and it talks about our abnormal reaction and that type of thing. That's a problem. And then I say the solution, the psychic change, being recovered, having so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. I point those things out just in conversation. I say, okay, I want you to highlight from the preface the doctor's opinion. I want you to get a cheap spiral that has a cover that you can write on the inside, not a plastic cover. And I'll tell you why when we meet. And I want you to meet me here. What's a good day for you? And we meet at the meeting. Then we go to my house and we read what they highlighted. So we go through the book together and we read what they highlighted in that section. And we talk a little bit about things. And if they miss something that to me is so important that I don't want them to miss it, and there are things like that, I will say, hey, what do you think about this? Look at the third paragraph, the second line where it says, we have recovered. Doesn't that sound important? So if anything sounds like recovered, which is what we need, let's go ahead and highlight that next time. But don't worry about it. Well, and in that first assignment, I kind of show them what it is that I highlighted and what they might look at. And I see as they go along, as we go into chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3, they're highlighting more and more and more. And of course, chapter 2 and chapter 3, it's almost impossible not to highlight a lot of the paragraphs in there. So it takes longer to meet with them, because they're reading the book to me and we're stopping and talking about certain things. Like when we get to the section in chapter 2 where it talks about the way, or I guess it's chapter 3 where it talks about the ways that we've tried to control our drinking. Instead of having them read all the things in that paragraph, I'll say, tell me a few ways that you've tried to control your drinking. You know, my big one, when I was like a freshman in high school, I decided that I was no longer going to buy marijuana. That I was only going to smoke other people's marijuana, and that was fine, which was cool until my friends got sick of me smoking their marijuana, and then I'd have to buy some to share, but of course I'd smoke it all myself, you know? So that was like my first attempt at regulating my drinking or drugging. And so I asked them to do that, you know? And I could go through all of the steps in the process through chapter 2, chapter 3, but we basically do a chapter up through chapter 5. And then in chapter 5, I have them read and highlight it, but then we stop at the instructions for the fourth step, you know, and we do get on our knees
for the third step
and hold hands and do the whole
third step thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is on page 63
right.
For those of you.
And so let me say something about that. That is where this relationship with Clovis came from. In other words, we didn't sit and BS. We did that eventually, because we became such good friends. So we talked about everything. But in the beginning, there was enough stuff to talk about in how I related to more about alcoholism and we agnostics, you know, we talked about God. We talked about my religious upbringing and my parents being stoners and my dad being a Baptist deacon while my mom was a Methodist minister, and how I just couldn't get my head around their lifestyles and the way they parented me. And we went through all that. And so we had very deep, let's get to know each other. Who are you as a person? Where really for the first time in my life, and I don't know why, maybe God did this for me. I don't really know why. I felt completely comfortable telling him every single thing about me that I was aware of. And there were things that I told him about myself, and they weren't the obvious things. You know, some of the really gross, disgusting behavior, I was kind of proud of that, and I would talk about that in front of people just to shock them. But more the way I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin, the way I felt inadequate, you know, the way I felt unloved, you know, and I had never been able to talk about that with anyone. You know, if I tried to talk to my mom about not feeling loved, I mean, what she would have said is, "Oh, honey, you know we love you." And that was supposed to be the end of it. But with Clovis, I got to talk about it with him, and he was like, you know, I felt that way too. You know, my mom and dad loved me, but I wasn't getting from them what I needed. And I'd never had conversations like that. with anyone, much less this man who I had only known for a brief time. And that relationship, I believe, was the springboard to everything about my life today. I'm not saying it's the reason for it. I'm saying it's where it started. And so the relationships I've had with all of these sponsees and with you and with, different people in the program who I'm not their sponsor, but they say, hey, man, can we talk after the meeting? And because they know, because I'm open in meetings about my failures and they've had those failures and they know they can trust me not to tell other people. And in all of those relationships, there are people at every AA meeting I go to, every single one, be it the Preston group or the Frisco group or the Prosper group, at every single group that I have sat alone somewhere and talked about the most important, vulnerable places that we have. And let me tell you something. David the crackhead wasn't having those conversations with people. And I was desperate to have them, and I didn't even know it. And sponsorship made that possible for me.
So this is just a thought that came in my head. It's kind of turning a corner a little bit. I know you, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on mic or not. I know that you had another sibling.
Yes.
A brother.
Yes.
And I don't know if we've talked even much about that.
Yeah.
Just me and you.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something inside me that's kind of telling me to ask you about it and let's have a conversation about it. Tell me about your brother.
So Jeff was my stepbrother, and he was my stepbrother since he was a very little boy. My dad and mom divorced when I was 9. Debbie, my new stepmother, had been a friend of the family for years, and Jeff and I had played together since he was too small for a big wheel. And so he and I were always friends. We played a lot together. We spent a ton of time together, went on vacations together. And he was younger than me. And I think as he got older, this wasn't the case. But when he was young, like junior high and stuff, he really looked up to me. I was in college and he looked up to me, and it was not a good person to look up to. I mean, I think in some ways, Jeff kind of idolized me. I could be way off on that, but when I would hang out with him and go out with my friends, I could tell that he was really trying to show me that he was cool too, And a lot of that involved, of course, when you hung out with me, you were doing drugs. And he was already doing drugs at a much younger age than I had started. I don't know what my influence over that was. My dad was a dentist, and at that time, dentists kept, at least my dad, the dentist, kept a lot of pills around. You could go to my dad's office and he would have Percocets and Furanol. Like when I was a kid, when we got a headache, we took a Furanol, which is a controlled substance to get rid of our headaches. I'm talking when I was 10. And I think Jeff probably went through that too. And as he got older, he had some really bad situations occur in his life, some directly as a result of his using. He was in a fatal car crash when he was 16 years old, and the girl in the car with him was killed, and he was at fault and was on drugs at the time. And there was a big legal battle and all that. But the truth was, I could see that Jeff, he was really, I talk about shaky ground. Jeff was on really shaky ground, and no one really knew what to do about it. I know my stepmom just loved him, and I'm friends with my stepmom still today, even though my dad and her got divorced before he died. We're still very friendly, and she knows how much I cared for Jeff. I don't think she knew that until the past few years. But I know that she did everything that she thought she could, but the truth was Jeff just could not get on track. He got knocked so far off track. And when he was in his mid-30s, he finally, after spending several bouts in prison and jail and attempts at sobriety that were short-lived. To give you an example, the last time I spoke to Jeff, he was calling me to make amends to me. I had paid for him to go to a sober living about a year or two before, and I'd paid for a couple months, and he called me to make amends to me. He wanted me to know that he didn't realize that my dad hadn't paid for it. He didn't realize that I had actually paid for it, and that he wanted to pay me back. And I said, you know what, man? you don't have to pay me back. It would really pay me back as if when someone came along that you could help, that you would do that for them. That would be all that I needed. And that was the last time I spoke to him. A few months later, they found him dead. He had asphyxiated on his own vomit from taking too many pills. And it was just a really heartbreaking thing to me. You know, it feels like inside of me, and I'm feeling emotional about this, that I had a way bigger influence on him as an active drug addict than I was able to have on him as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, because I tried to get him to come to meetings with me. I tried to get him into sober living and to walk this path with us because I knew he needed it desperately, you know, and he just could not. For whatever reason, you know, some of us just can't do it, you know, and it's a little bit heartbreaking to me because let me tell you, Jeff was the nice guy. He was. Anybody that knew Jeff, he was the guy that at Christmas would open Seth and Libby's presents with them and put together the mousetrap game and play with them for hours, you know. He was just a sweet, gentle, kind person with a really bad drug problem.
Thanks. I don't, like I said, I don't think we'd ever talk.
And we do
that.
need to, you know, I want Jeff, I put his picture up on Facebook. I know that's maybe lame, but it's the best we have sometimes, you know, to remember him, you know. I just want him to be remembered. And I just went maybe 3 or 4 months ago, me and Seth and Libby and we all went out with Debbie to my stepmom to the Arboretum where she bought a bench in his name and we had a picnic at his bench, you know, just trying to remember him. You know, there's so many souls that just get lost in time because of this disease. They just disappear. It's like they just vaporize, you know? And I always thought I'd have more time with Jeff. You know, we were a little bit estranged because of his disease and my recovery. They didn't mesh, right? But I always believed that eventually Jeff was going to get it and that we would be friends, that we would be able to be close again. And it didn't happen. You know, the drugs and alcohol took him.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. All right, so let me segue them back to, like I said, it came to my mind and I just.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I want to be reminded and remind others of him. You know, maybe some of his friends that are out there, you know, his cousin passed away from this disease. He was his closest bud. You know, I hope that somehow what happened with Jeff can become someone's sobriety.
Yeah.
You know?
All right. Well, let's segue back then into the sponsorship.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I know what you were saying, what you do with folks, you know, just basically the highlighting and, you know, the recovery and you know, what's the problem and all that sort of stuff. And then you talked about the third step and then you kind of got up to the fourth step and
Yep.
I think I stopped you right there. So
Yep.
when you get to the fourth step, is it the traditional 3 columns, fourth column?
We do it straight out of the book. We add the fourth column, which really isn't in the book,
Right.
but you know, it's in the book, but it's not in the book.
Right.
And I do 4 columns on everything. So, you know, like, you know, we have what we resent, why we resent it, how it affects us, our part, you know, or our faults. In the fear inventory, we have what we're afraid, what name the fear. Second column, what it is about that fear that we fear. The third column for my sponsees is how did self-reliance fail me? And then the fourth column is based on that sentence that says, just to the extent that we do as God would have us, are we able to match calamity with serenity? Kind of the what would Jesus do thing, you know? I mean, no matter how I feel about it, how should I really behave in the circumstances, right? In the sex inventory, it's the same thing. You name the situation or the person. You write about what was the situation. You write where you were selfish, dishonest, self-seeking. Where did you arouse suspicion or jealousy? And then in the fourth column, how should I have behaved? And through that, we form a sane and sound sex ideal. And it's the same thing really to me with fears and resentments. Through that fourth column, I developed a sane ideal for how I'm going to live. And really, this is kind of a perfect place to say, I believe that this is where I began to feel the ground under my feet get solid. right? Began to. Doing step 1, 2, and 3 with my sponsor, a lot of wonderful things happened, a lot of big conversations. But when I wrote this stuff and then sat with Clovis for my 5th step, and we went through it in a way that was loving but serious, right? He didn't let me off the hook about anything, but he also let me know that it's okay to be fallible. It's okay to be a failure. It's okay to be sick and do sick things and hurt people in this context. And it was in that, I remember the day after my 5th step, we did it in the middle of the night from like 11 at night till 4 in the morning. And I got up, I went home and went to sleep, and I did my little 6 and 7 before I went to bed. And I woke up at about 11:15 and rushed to get in the shower. And I remember walking into my meeting, and I can still picture it in my head today. And this is like 28, 29 years ago. And I remember looking around the people in the room at my AA group and seeing them in a completely different way than I had ever seen them. No matter if they were newcomers or old timers or middle, whether they were people I enjoyed listening to them share or they were pains in the ass, no matter what they were, whether they were rich or poor or businessmen or vagrants, we had it all. We were in North Dallas and there was a lot of everything. I remember realizing at that moment that every one of those people was at that meeting for the exact same reason I was. And I'd never felt that way. I never felt that connected to the group of people I was with. I was always at odds. I always immediately saw the BS. I could really relate when someone says, well, I love everybody in AA, but I sure don't like them. I could relate to that. Yeah, you're right. What a bunch of DBs, right? And at that moment, I realized, what? I really do like everybody here because I can relate to their sick. I go to meetings and I really do like everybody at the meeting because I get it. I get why sometimes they say stupid, inappropriate things because they feel anxious and irritable and disengaged and empty. And all I really want to do for that person, and it's not my role for every person, right? In fact, for most people, it's not. But all I really want for that person who is being the idiot in the room is to do this deal so they can have solid ground under their feet so they don't need to act so weird and inappropriate and unhappy. And that's where I got it. I got it in the steps. I got something that I could talk about and be authoritative about it because it was so true in my life instead of being authoritative about it because I thought I had to convince you that I knew everything because my ego was so desperately seeking your approval.
So, and more back to the technical pieces. So, what I'm thinking of is it's interesting. I understand everything that you're talking about, but until people actually take somebody through these steps or they do them themselves or, you're coordinating if they're coming to your house, if you're meeting them at a coffee shop, if you're, which parts of the book you're going to read and all this stuff, it's really... I mean, practice makes well, I don't know if it's perfect, but you've had so much practice.
Make something happen,
right? You know how to coordinate it, and so now you're getting people to the 5th step and the 6th step and the 7th step.
Yep.
So, on a technical kind of basis, what do you do to take them through that part of the steps?
So obviously, we do what the big book says after the 5th step. Depending on how long someone's been sober, because I have people that I sponsor and we go through the steps that have been sober for years, I may or may not bring out the 12 and 12. And because step 6 and the 12 and 12 is crazy on point, about, how we all have these natural desires, but we let them go beyond their intended purpose, that there's nothing wrong with wanting to have money to take care of our lives and be healthy, happy people, but being miserly or greedy or ostentatious or taking it over the top is where we get sick. And the book describes it as the measure of our character defects. And so there may be people that I do that with, but a lot of times we just go into step 8. Now, as you know, because you've been around me a lot, there is a section in step 8 of the 12 and 12 that I now read to every single person that I go through the steps with. And it's talking about the harms done others and the harms we do there ourselves. And so this is a little bit of a new wrinkle probably over the past decade, that when I have someone do their 8-step list, not only do I have them look at how they harmed the people in their lives and be very direct and specific about the way they harmed others, but after they've done that, to then look at how that has harmed them. You know, I lied to you, I stole from you, and I got away with it, and I need to go fix that. And the book, the 12 and 12 says that this is paramount. Fixing these things is paramount. But then it says, but equally important is that we extricate from this every flaw within ourselves, and I'm paraphrasing, and how we've harmed ourselves. So when I'm able to look in the eyes of the person I love and tell them a complete lie, but be so convincing that they believe me and they're comforted by my lie, when I'm in the same situation and someone is trying to comfort me and let me know that what I think has happened has not happened, and they're saying, no, it did not happen, and look me in the eye and tell me they love me and they would never lie about this, that it is really hard for me to believe. And it's the consequence of being a liar. You know, Jim Butterly says something so funny, and it's just true. He said he went up one side of the street selling his bullshit and went down the other side of the street buying it. Right. And that's the problem for me long-term in sobriety, and it's something that I want people to get started on right off. It's not just the outsides, the external relationships with other people that I need to fix in my 8th and 9th step. I need to do my best to do that, but I better be aware that there's a lot of damage in me that was created by pulling that stuff off. Right. I didn't get away with anything. You know, we talked in the meeting about that a little today, and I probably, if I would have been called on, I would have shared about it. And that is this kind of idea that when I am making things right in my life, it is equally important that I am making things right inside of me. You know, I make amends to other people because I need to get right with them. And even if they were 99% right and I was 1% wrong, or they were 99% wrong and I was 1% wrong, that the reason I look past their wrong is so that I can heal from my wrong. Because no matter what justification I have for being cruel or dishonest, whatever it is, when you take all that away, I still have the feelings of a cruel, dishonest person. And I better get right with that, or I'm going to need to drink again.
Yeah. So then the 9th and the 10th and 11th and 12th come up for these guys that you're sponsoring. By the way, I know you've sponsored some women too, but for the most part, it's guys. So when you're taking somebody through that, then, I mean, what are some of the, pages you point them to, and, what's the overall message? Take me through that.
For that part, it's more of a discussion. You know, mine changed through the years. For many years, because it's what my sponsor said he did, I just did kind of a mental checklist before I went to bed. I kind of went through the day and did a gut check.
Yeah.
And so then when I met Sarah, she was doing this app, right, that basically went through and asked her all the questions. And I asked her, what are you doing? And this is about 5 years ago. And it asked all the questions in the 11th step of the big book. And so I had the app.
And just so people know, you're talking about page 84, 85, 86, 87.
Right.
Where it
we
says
think about the 24 hours ahead. And then then it says when we retire at night. Which is super confusing because to me, this is inventory, but they're calling this meditation, but it really doesn't matter. When I retire at night, and I don't do this every day, but I do it often, I go through those questions now. And what I discovered, and it has really made a difference in my life, and I typically only do it on days that I'm having a bad day. Like something is eating at me, and if I will go into my phone and turn on this app and go through the questions, I'll be able to sleep. And sometimes I'll forward that to you if I think we need to talk about it. I used to forward it to you a lot, but then I thought this guy doesn't need his phone to ding at 1 o'clock in the morning because I can't sleep. But anyway, when I go through it, what I discovered that I had not known, and remember that's 5 years ago, I was 23 years sober, is that the way I did my 10 and 11 at night, all I ever did was think about what was wrong with me. When I did the gut check and I got a sinking feeling in my stomach, I would go back through the day and think, what happened? Did I, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I need to fix that. And maybe I'll fix it right now, or maybe I'll fix it in the morning. But what I didn't do is I didn't say, what did we pack into the stream of life? Right. I didn't ask myself, had I been selfless today? Had I thought of other people? And the truth was, I spent a lot of years in Alcoholics Anonymous doing tons of things for other people. And instead of feeling good about myself as a person and having better self-esteem, I began to become irritated that people wanted stuff from me all the time. And I believe it's because I wasn't taking the time at night to appreciate that God had made me a person capable of doing things for other people without expecting anything in return.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know that line it says, were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or
right,
were we thinking of what we could pack into the stream of life? And I've always kind of seen that on the negative side of it.
Yep.
As opposed to the, or were we thinking about what we could pack into the stream?
Right.
I've always kind of considered it to be, and I'm not saying this is right? It's interesting having this discussion in that I've always thought of it like, we're trying to, come up with how we've been a bad boy, so to speak, and we weren't, were we thinking of, were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? And that's usually what I've focused on. So I like
kind of spending my time picking myself apart in negative ways and not being appreciative and grateful for the good things that I've done.
What's the name? I'm sure there's going to be people listening right now. They're going, what's that app he's talking about? Do you know the name of it?
Yeah, it's AA Toolkit.
AA Toolkit. Yep. All right. And we don't, we're
I don't
not
even know if it's available anymore. Right. It's funny because when Sarah had it, I looked on my phone and I'd already had it. So anyway, not to push apps or anything, but yeah, that was a big change for me. And I tell people about that, and I'll tell you another thing that I now do with my sponsees that I didn't for a long time. I think it's not about being permissive. I don't boss people around, but the people that I know, and I'm talking about people that I know well. I'm not just talking about everybody. I'm not trying to be like overgeneralized, but the people that I know that really appear to have happy, joyous, and free lives for the most part, and tend to be people who are giving back and doing for others and being givers at the group and apparently in their personal lives, go to meetings all the time, right? And so back to that spiral with the notebook in the cover. We've talked about this before, but it can't be said enough. And this is not in the big book. I mean, I guess you could find ways to pull it out of the big book for sure, but it's not like specifically listed in the big book. But it is those 5 things that I do every day. And when we got to that line in the doctor's opinion where it talked about he is easily able to control his desire for alcohol as long as he follows a few simple rules, Clovis had me stop, open my spiral, and write a few simple rules. 1, upon awakening, get on my knees and ask God to keep me sober. 2, read AA literature. 3, go to a meeting every day. Yes, every day. You drank every day, you go to a meeting every day. 4, speak to another alcoholic about recovery. And 5, thank God for your sobriety at night. And I'll say this about it. Whenever someone comes to me, almost without exception, that I sponsor, and tells me that the shit is hitting the fan in their life, I ask them those questions. Tell me about your meditation this morning. What did you read? And it's almost always, I didn't read anything this morning. Okay, well, that's cool. Tell me about what meeting you went to today. How about yesterday? And it's this weird thing. It's almost like going through the steps backwards, where we stop carrying the message. We stop praying and meditating. We stop taking personal inventory. We stop, instead of making our lives with other people better, we start hurting other people. Our character defects resurface. We become resentful, act out sexually, and are fearful. We go back to where, instead of turning our will and our life over to the care of God, we're taking it all back, man, because if I don't get this done, my life's over. And we've gone back into the insanity of step 2, and we are again powerless over alcohol. I mean, it is almost mind-blowing what a recovered person going backwards in their program to the drink looks like.
That's a great way to end it. That's a great point. I love that there. In fact, I've thought, I've heard you call it the 5 alive,
Yep.
what you just mentioned a moment ago, those 5 things to do in order to stay sober. And I've thought many times about actually putting that on the website, for people to download and stuff like that. Maybe even have a, anyway,
The one thing I'll say about that, because I
Yes.
do think it's a wonderful part of recovery that I think anyone would benefit from, it has to go hand in hand with working the 12 steps from the
True.
big book. It in and of itself, it is a peripheral part of the solution.
Yeah.
But without the step work to have the psychic change and feel a part of and be a part of, because that's the big deal. I never felt a part of, and my relationship with my sponsor started me down the path of feeling a part of.
Right. Wonderful, David. As always, let's not wait a year again.
Yeah, that was crazy. I don't know. I can't believe it was that long.
Yeah, it's been that long. As you know, we always read from page 164 of the big book. Here to close us out, it says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and David G., as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thank you so much, David, for coming on. I really appreciate you, man.
Great to be here, man.
As a friend as well. God
Yep,
bless you.
For sure.
As always, David G. delivers the goods. I just love having conversations with him, and you never know exactly where the conversation is going to go. You can see his mind going about 1,000,000 miles an hour. How he keeps all that stuff in his head, I have no idea, but it is always wonderful to have a conversation with David G. If you enjoyed that, and who did not, and you want to share that episode with another person, just pause your device, hit that little share button, and send it on to a friend or a family member. Guess what? It may be just what they need today. We definitely will have David back on in the near future. I just got to schedule some time with him, and he is always full of content. And I mean that in the kindest way. I mean, he just has so much information, content to share, and I know that the Sober Speak listeners enjoy it, and I can't wait to have him back on again. All right. I should have mentioned this at the beginning of this here episode, but I did not. Would you call it making a mistake? No, not really making a mistake. I just forgot. Yeah, that's a good word. Forgot. So a lot of you have been writing in over the past 6-8 months or so and asking me when we're going to have another Sober Speak Live. So we're going to have another Sober Speak Live, and it's going to be, it's way out now, right? But just in case you are, want to make plans to come from out of town or something, you can. So we got 2 things going on. On December 2nd, Gary K., yes, the one and only Gary K., will be at our Sober Speak Live event. It's going to be at the Grace Avenue United Methodist Church. That's going to be on Friday night. And then immediately following Sober Speak Live, it's going to be the Frisco party. The Frisco group holiday party. So you got food there, you got food, you got refreshments, going to have music, the whole 9 yards, but I just want to let everyone know that's going on. And like I said, I know it's a way out, but I just wanted to get a little just let everyone know, right? Get a little announcement out there. Get the excitement going. Get it moving. All right, I'll shut up now. Here we go. Now, on to listener feedback. Joshua writes in, and he says, John, I have a tree, and my name is Joshua. I'm just kidding. He did not say that. That is me being completely silly. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Joshua. I have a tree. I got to keep this fun for myself. I mean, hey, you come and do 260 or whatever it is of these episodes and try to stay sane and keep yourself entertained at the same time and stay motivated. It is not easy, my friends. Anyway, I'm sorry, just cracking myself up. All right, Joshua writes in. He says, "Good evening, John M." Well, good evening, Joshua. He says, "First of all, thank you for adding me to the Facebook group." Well, Joshua, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for coming on in. And he said, "Second, I found your Sober Speak by downloading the big book on my phone and listening to your podcast, and I heard you mention your Facebook page. I'm 41 years old, and I have been sober the longest I've been sober since I started drinking on a daily basis about 20 years ago. And now it's been about 21 days. Good for you, Joshua." He said, "I've found myself at wit's end." Yeah, I've heard that a few times from a few folks in the program, Joshua, finding ourselves at wit's end. He said, "With my wife and kids telling me I drink too much. There was never any physical fights, and it was the occasional argument with my wife. But I was just fed up with my own drinking. We both own businesses, and my life was just not headed in the right direction I wanted it to. I found myself breaking down a little farther every time I picked up a beer." It's a good way to put it, Joshua. He says, "I've been to 3 meetings and met some awesome people. I'm working on step 3, but I'm not real sure how to do it all. And that's why I'm taking it 24 hours at a time. I started listening to your podcast about steps 2 and 3. Again, thank you for adding me in the Facebook group, Joshua." Once again, Joshua, the pleasure's all mine. Congratulations on your new sobriety, and just stay plugged in there locally with those folks. There's a lot of people with a lot of great wisdom who can help you out. Thanks for writing in. Corey writes in and he says, "Hello, John. My name is Corey and I'm an alcoholic. Hard to say my name without that coming second. Ha ha." He says, "First of all, let me say how much I love your podcast. This is not the first time I have wrote you. Actually, it's been a while since I've written you, but I did a long time ago. I listen to your podcast almost every Sunday while I mow my lawn. And let me just say what a pleasure it has been to have your podcast to get me through that chore." Well, hopefully you know what? We're coming up on the winter here. I don't know what you're going to do when we hit the winter. I'm assuming you don't live in a place where you have to mow it all year long, but who knows? But hopefully you are actually mowing the lawn while you're listening to this, Corey, and we can help get you through it. He says, "It's been a great part of my recovery. The reason I'm reaching out to you today is that I'm currently the program chair for one of my Districts 82 conferences, the MOB conference, MOB conference in Lake Jackson in May of 2023. We actually had your friend Jimmy D last year as our Friday speaker. I had the pleasure of being the host for him and really enjoyed getting to know him a bit. We got to chat about you and your podcast as well." That's great. Jimmy D. I got to have him back on as well. Oh, all these things. There's so many things I want to do with the podcast. Through email communications. By the way, if you're not on my list and you want to be, write me at John, JOHN at soberspeak.com. We'll get you on there. But through email communications and there's just so many things I could do. But I've got this thing called a JOB, and then I've also got this family, and so it's just, there's just so much time in the world. Anyway, so he says, so this year we have our Friday and Saturday speaker set, but we're looking for a Sunday morning speaker and someone who is local to Houston or the surrounding areas. I was reaching out because I believe I've heard you mention helping find speakers. If you have anyone you can recommend, or possibly a list of speakers in the Texas area, that would be great. We are really hoping to find a speaker close to the Houston area but may reach out a little farther if need be. I appreciate everything you do for this program. I really enjoy the humor and the knowledge that I get from your podcast. I'm a big fan of the Sober Speak tapes, but I really love the added banter. Some people may disagree with you, and conversation that comes with your style of the podcast. I was telling my fiance about one of your podcasts a while back and talking about something goofy you had said. Something goofy I said? But and then he said, I said it's pretty cheesy or something along those lines. And then my fiance, kind of gave me this look for a second and said, "You spot it if you got it." Keep doing what you're doing, and I hope all is well there in Dallas. Well, thank you, fella Cheester. I appreciate you, Corey. And if your fiance is listening, thank you for pointing out that you spot it if you got it. Thanks for writing in. Dunstan writes in, and Dunstan says, "Hi, John. So someone from the Orange Park AA group gave me the first 4-step worksheets you did." He's talking about what's on the website, actually. But anyway, so Orange Park AA group. I don't know exactly where that is, and I don't think Dunstan says, but I'm going to assume it's probably in Florida or California. But nonetheless, he says, "I love the 4-step worksheets, and I went combing the web looking for the rest, and I found Sober Speak. I'm about to get my 60-day chip in a few days, and I'm working the steps. Sober Speak still has the 4 worksheets in process that I'm waiting on." Dunstan. Okay, so what he's saying, like if you go to our website, www.soberspeak.com, and you click on Sober Resources, you can see some step worksheets there. However, there's like 4 worksheets that need to be filled in. So so that's 12. So we got 2/3 of the worksheets up there. And by the way, worksheets are all over the place. And the ones we have on soberspeak.com are they better or worse? It's like everyone has a preference, right? And I don't know but if there's something there that can help you, I sure hope they can. Obviously, it helped out Dunstan. Thanks for writing in, Dunstan. James writes in and he says, "Hey, I was referred here for something called sponsee worksheets. I'm not the person who gave me this reference. Has the correct place." Okay, so he came in through the website as well. And what he's looking for is some sort of sponsee worksheet. And we don't have a sponsee worksheet. We have several articles on, sponsor and sponsorship and all that kind of stuff. So if you go there and just kind of search for that word on the website, you'll find something. Edna writes in, and Edna says, "Hi, John. I got sober by the grace of God on September 5th, 1999, and I live in St. Stephen, NB, Canada." NB, I believe that is New Brunswick, if I'm not mistaken. And she says, "I sponsor several women and was on the internet looking for some additional info on step 4 for one of the ladies that's struggling with the process. And that's how I found your website. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with many others. Wishing you many years of sobriety, one day at a time. Your AA sister in sobriety, Edna." Well, Edna, I'm glad you found us. Once again, we have a lot of people finding our website through these step worksheets lately, and I'm glad that they are being of service. I'm glad that they're helping out some folks. And finally, Jackie writes in and she says, "Hello, John. Thank you for your website. It's great." Here's another one of these. She says, "I have been with hospice for 20 years. Oh, yeah, that's right, because Jackie had sent in an email or something, and I replied to her, and without identifying her, I realized that she was in hospice, and I asked her about it. She says, "I've been in hospice for 20 years. I was an RN and became a team manager over a group of people. I retired in 2010, but I do private work for patients who need the end-of-life care. I find taking care of patients so close to death, so rewarding, because we can cut through the crap and get down to really deep spiritual conversations. I got sober in 2007, and I have been lucky to live in the Florida Keys with my hubby and my golden retriever. Life is so good these days, about 5 exclamation points. She says, I found your site Monday, and I was impressed with how easy it is to navigate around. I used your step 6 worksheet, and I loved it. I have only started listening to one speaker so far. I have only listened to one speaker thus far, but I'll be back to listen to more. Thank you once again, Jackie J in Key Largo. That's so cool you do that hospice work. And I mentioned this on the Ken D episode that I had released a couple, 3 weeks back. The Ken D had actually got me started in hospice, and it's great, great work. All right, everybody. That there is another week, another episode of Sober Speak. I hope to be back next week. God bless you, one day at a time. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. And what's the other thing I like to say? May God bless you and keep you. Until then, be well. Love you guys.